I don't know who God is exactly, but I'll tell you this. I was sitting in the river named Clarion on a water-splashed stone, and all afternoon I listened to the voices of the river talking. Whenever the water struck a stone, it had something to say, and the water itself, and even the mosses trailing under the water. And slowly, very slowly, it became clear to me what they were saying. Said the river, I am part of holiness. And I too, said the stone, and I too, whispered the moss beneath the water. I'd been to the river before, a few times. Don't blame the river that nothing happened quickly. You don't hear such voices in an hour or a day. You don't hear them at all if the selfhood has stuffed your ears. And it's difficult to hear anything anyway, through all the traffic, the ambition. I will only make a half-hearted apology today for being on a bit of a Mary Oliver kick, having started these two most recent sermons with words from her beautiful poems. But as she was a poet who so often wrote about nature, I feel like she grasps themes of creation in such beautiful and profound ways. So stay tuned next week to see if I go 3 for 3 in this Caring for Creation series. But I love these words of this poem at the River Clarion, which were new to me this week, unlike When I Am Among the Trees that we heard last Sunday. Her words here reflect a truth that I think we find in our lessons this week that center around the image of rivers. She says, don't blame the river that nothing happened quickly. You don't hear such voices in an hour or a day. You don't hear them at all if selfhood has stuffed your ears. In these words and in our lessons for today, I think we hear an important theme: persistence. Rivers are persistent. A raindrop doesn't carve rocks, but a river does. The persistent, continual, relentless, seemingly everlasting flow of a river can carve rocks into nothing, smooth rough edges, reshape the face of the earth, produce wonders as spectacular as the Grand Canyon, and more. Persistent rivers and time can change the face of the world. Perhaps that's why when the prophet Amos speaks of justice, he doesn't cry out for a raindrop. He says, let justice roll down like a mighty river and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This justice is rooted in the abundance and persistence of God. Rivers of justice can reshape the world for so many who have been dashed upon the rocks of cruelty, bigotry, hatred, and indifference. So when we hear lessons like we hear today in Isaiah, which speak of the plight of the poor with nothing to drink, God doesn't just promise a cup of cool water, which would be nice in that moment. No, it says, when the poor and needy seek water and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on the bare heights and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water and the dry land springs of water. God is persistent and abundant, and shows us that mercy and justice for the poor must not take place in raindrops and cups, but through rivers of mercy and love, persistent and abundant like God's grace that is ever-flowing. Like a river that through persistence carves down the mightiest rocks, we are called to love persistently alongside our God to wear down the injustice of this world. Persistence is faithfulness and can change the earth. As Mary Oliver says, don't blame the river that nothing happens quickly. As we work for justice in this world, we cannot lament and give up because the change is not immediate. Yes, I know that can be frustrating. And yes, there are such things as flash floods. And we might see flash floods of justice, but those movements are the exception and not the rule. Flash floods of mercy can be wonderful, but we are called to abundant and life-giving rivers of faithfulness. As Jesus says in our gospel lesson today, out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water. We are called to have faith like a river that through God's persistent love and grace, the world can be changed and the jagged parts made new. The rivers of our world, the rivers that God pours out in the desert places to quench the thirst of those who suffer, sing songs to us of hope and holiness. They sing to us that God's kingdom may be known here and now, and in their faithful coursing remind us that these things take time. Stay with it. But we have a God who is faithful and is willing to play the long game of love, to bear with us in patience and persistence, weathering even our hardened hearts in grace, that we might know our smooth and beloved place in the movement of God's mercy that belongs to all people. And as Mary Oliver wisely reminds us, you don't hear the holy songs of the river at all if selfhood has stuffed your ears. And it's difficult to hear anything anyway through all the traffic, the ambition. All throughout human history, culture and civilization have gathered and organized around rivers. Rivers are life-giving by their nature, and if we are called by Christ to let living waters of the Spirit flow from our hearts, then we are called to the words of building up life and not destroying it. Raindrops don't change the face of the world. Rivers do. We, as God's people, are not meant to set out to the world of faithfulness as individuals, but as communities. The baptismal waters have washed us together into a living stream, called us to build up and affirm the belovedness of each member of this body, and yes, that includes you, beloved. And it calls us to reshape the world in love and hope. In this way, as we look to the world around us and our call to care for creation, we must again remember that we need rivers and not raindrops. We need persistence and not just performance. I know that this creation care series is brief, but we can't just spend 3 weeks a year talking about the goodness of God's creation and worship and then think we're good. We can't just switch out to a reusable water bottle and think that our work is done. As rapid and dramatic changes in weather and climate continue to afflict us, and the devastating effects of global climate change become more and more apparent, we are called to the work of rivers and not raindrops. We are called to the sustained community efforts to reshape our homes, our community, our nation, and our world. Our small acts matter, just as raindrops are part of a river. But we, as these living waters of God have washed us together into one body, we are meant to offer persistent and organized community effort to restore our world. This river will sing a new song of transformation to the heights of power and to all those who work to use and abuse this planet for personal gain. We as a planet are pressed for time on this issue of righting the wrongs of injustice against creation, but this work will still take time. Let us not despair in that. Let us not waver, and let us not ignore the need. Don't blame the river that nothing happened quickly. Stay persistent and rooted in the hope of the rivers. These living waters that will heal our world and transform our future flow from each of us. Let us organize and recommit. Let us clear the selfhood and ambition from our hearts and our ears that we may hear clearly the cries of creation and the deep longing for justice that is all around us. The injustices against creation have and will continue to affect the poor of this world first. Isaiah gives us a vision of God's response to the plight of the poor, and it is abundant transformation. God's way is a river of hope that lifts up the poor and wears down the mighty. Let us claim our beloved place as more than just disconnected raindrops, but as part of God's river of love and hope that flows persistently in the way of justice here and now. So if you can, spend some time by the river this week. Hear the songs of holiness being sung in the waters there. Hear this call to community, faithfulness, and persistence. God's love is persistent and life-giving, like the rivers all around us. May we find and claim our place in God's movement, here and now. Amen.